What if the very people who ridiculed your dreams and belittled your efforts came crawling back, desperate for your help, when everything they had built teetered on the edge of collapse? Imagine dedicating your life to something you loved, only to have it dismissed as insignificant, a mere hobby not worthy of respect. This is a story about strength, resilience, and the unshakable power of knowing your worth. Our journey begins in the heart of Atlanta's West End, where a young woman grew up in her family's cozy soul food restaurant. It wasn't much to outsiders, just a small, bustling eatery with mismatched chairs and the aroma of fried chicken and collard greens filling the air. But to her, it was everything. It was a legacy, a reminder of her late father's love for cooking, and a testament to the idea that food wasn't just nourishment, it was culture, tradition, and a way to bring people together. Despite pouring her heart into every dish, the world outside those walls wasn't always kind. When she met James, the charming and seemingly supportive man she thought would be her future, her world collided with his family, a wealthy dynasty who owned a billion-dollar hospitality empire. To them, her small restaurant wasn't a source of pride, it was a joke. They dismissed her passion as mere street food, unworthy of their refined tastes and high standards. With every smirk and condescending comment, they made their opinion clear: she would never fit into their world. But the world has a way of humbling even the mightiest. While they looked down on her, she was quietly working on something extraordinary, a tech platform designed to revolutionize the restaurant industry. What they couldn't see, or wouldn't see, was that this so-called street food wasn't just a family recipe, it was the foundation for innovation, a symbol of resilience, and a force strong enough to change everything. And then, the unthinkable happened. The empire they'd built, the one they flaunted so arrogantly, began to crumble. Fraud allegations, plummeting stock prices, and operational chaos turned their billion-dollar business into a sinking ship. In their desperation, they turned to the one person they had belittled for so long. But why did their empire fall? And what made them so sure that the woman they had mocked could be their savior? This is a story about redemption, reckoning, and the quiet power of proving everyone wrong, not through revenge, but through the unshakable strength of being true to yourself. So, how did she do it? How did her street food become the billion-dollar rescue they never saw coming? Stay with us as we uncover the remarkable journey of resilience, redemption, and justice served with a side of karmic irony. Before we dive deeper into this story today, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this journey, and give this video thumbs up. Your support energized us for sharing these intimate stories, and remember to turn on notifications so you won't miss any future episodes. To truly understand how I ended up saving the very people who mocked me, you need to know where I came from, Atlanta's historic West End. That's where it all began for me, in a small soul food restaurant that was the pride and joy of my family. It wasn't fancy or trendy, and it definitely didn't have the shine of those luxury restaurants you see in magazines. It was humble, mismatched chairs, handwritten menus, and the smell of fried chicken, collard greens, and peach cobbler wafting through the air. But to me, it was home. My father ran the kitchen with the kind of love and pride that's hard to put into words. Every dish he made carried a piece of him, and watching him work was like watching an artist paint a masterpiece. My grandmother, though, she was the soul of that place. She'd shuffle around the kitchen, her hands steady as she stirred pots and rolled dough. "Good food comes from the heart," she'd say, her voice gentle but firm. "Not just from the ingredients." That wisdom shaped me in ways I didn't even realize back then. For as long as I can remember, the restaurant wasn't just where we worked, it was where we lived. It was where neighbors came to celebrate birthdays, where families gathered after church, and where strangers became friends over a plate of fried catfish and cornbread. It was more than a business, it was a legacy. And that legacy was what drove me every single day. But even with all the love and pride we poured into that place, it wasn't easy. Running a small restaurant came with its challenges. Keeping the shelves stocked, managing deliveries, juggling bills, it felt like a constant uphill battle. I saw the strain it put on my father and my grandmother. And I thought, there has to be a better way. While I loved our little corner of the West End, I wanted more, not more for me, but more for us. I wanted to find a way to make life easier, to ensure that restaurants like ours didn't have to struggle just to survive. That's when I started dreaming bigger. During the day, I was in the kitchen, perfecting my grandmother's recipes and making sure every dish we served lived up to her standards. But at night, after the last plate was washed and the lights were dimmed, I was someone else entirely. I'd sit at my laptop, working on an idea that had been brewing in my mind for years, a tech platform designed to solve the very problems we faced every day. I thought, what if there was a way to make inventory management seamless? What if small restaurants could get the same tools big chains use, but without the cost? It became my secret project. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to build something real before I talked about it. I wanted to prove myself through action, not just words. And then James walked into my life. I'll never forget the first time I saw him. It was a stormy evening, and the rain was coming down in sheets. He walked into the restaurant looking completely out of place. Tall, impeccably dressed, and carrying an umbrella that probably cost more than I made in a week. He asked me what I'd recommend, and without thinking, I said, the smothered pork chops. He stayed that night, eating quietly in the corner. But something about him stuck with me. And apparently, something about me stuck with him too, because a few days later, he was back. And then again. Before I knew it, he was coming in 3 times a week. We started talking, at first about the food, then about life. He told me about his job in finance, and I shared stories about the restaurant, though I kept my tech project to myself. 6 months later, he proposed. It was simple and intimate, just the two of us in the restaurant after closing. I said yes, believing I'd found someone who truly understood me. But then I met his family, and everything changed. The Beths were, well, let's just say they were nothing like my family. They were wealthy, old money wealthy. They owned $1 billion hospitality empire that stretched across luxury hotels, fine dining establishments, and high-end resorts. Their flagship restaurant was the kind of place where every dish looked like a work of art, and the bill could feed a family for a month. To them, my little soul food spot in the West End wasn't a point of pride, it was an embarrassment. The first time I met Victoria, James's mother, she greeted me with a smile that felt more like a smirk. "A soul food restaurant," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. How quaint. Then there was Amanda, James's sister, who didn't even try to hide her disdain. "James, you can't be serious," she said, barely looking at me. "We're Beths. We own fine dining establishments, not street food stalls." Their words stung, but I stayed calm. Years of working in customer service had taught me how to keep my composure, even when people were being less than kind. But what hurt the most wasn't their insults. It was James. he didn't say a word. He just sat there, silent, as his family dismissed everything I had worked for. As the engagement went on, the insults kept coming. Victoria and Amanda made a habit of belittling my food, my restaurant, and, by extension, me. They didn't see my passion, my hard work, or my potential. All they saw was someone they thought wasn't good enough for their family. But what they didn't know was that while they were busy looking down on me, I was quietly building something that would one day change their lives forever. The engagement dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a formal gathering at one of the Beth family's flagship restaurants. It was opulent beyond anything I'd ever experienced: crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed place settings, and a menu crafted by a Michelin-starred chef. I walked in feeling out of place but determined to make a good impression. The dinner started off with polite conversation, but it didn't take long for things to take a turn. Victoria, James's mother, was the first to make a remark. "Marissa, darling, it's fascinating that you run a restaurant. Do you cook everything yourself, or do you have actual chefs?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock curiosity. Before I could respond, Amanda chimed in. "Mother, be kind. I'm sure she does her best with what she has. Not everyone can afford proper culinary training." The table fell silent, all eyes on me, but not a single word came from James. He sat there, focused on his plate, not even attempting to defend me. That moment was like a punch to the gut. I had spent years perfecting my craft, pouring my heart and soul into my food, only to have it reduced to a punchline. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Every comment from the Beths felt like another jab, subtle, veiled insults wrapped in fake politeness. I smiled through it all, but inside, I was fuming. That night, as I lay awake replaying every word, I realized something important. Their judgment wasn't about me or my work, it was about their fear of losing control. I wasn't what they expected, and that made me a threat. But instead of letting their words break me, I let them fuel me. I poured every ounce of that frustration into my work. While they were busy underestimating me, I was perfecting my tech platform, polishing every detail and running simulations to ensure it would be flawless. Then came the storm. It started as a quiet murmur in the news, an anonymous report about potential fraud within the Beth family's billion-dollar hospitality company. Within days, that murmur grew into a full-blown scandal. Fraud allegations were flying, their stock prices were in free fall, and investors were panicking. By the time the dust settled, their company was on the brink of collapse. It was at a family dinner when I saw it unfold firsthand. Victoria's phone buzzed with an alert, and I watched the color drain from her face as she read the headline. Amanda was frantically typing on her laptop, and Richard, James's father, was barking orders into his phone. James looked pale and uneasy. The room was tense, suffocating even, as the reality of their situation sank in. That's when it happened. James turned to me, desperation in his eyes, and said, "Marissa, we need to go to the office. This is a family emergency." I stayed seated, calm and composed. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I think I can help." The room went silent. Amanda shot me a skeptical glare, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Unless you can conjure $500 million, Marissa, I don't see how your noodle expertise is relevant here." I took a deep breath and pulled out my laptop. Turning it toward them, I said, "Have you heard of Food Tech Solutions?" Their reactions were priceless. Amanda's smug expression faltered, replaced by a mix of shock and recognition. Victoria leaned forward, her hand trembling slightly as she set down her wine glass. Richard narrowed his eyes, his business instincts kicking in. I founded it 3 years ago, I continued. It's currently valued at over $3 billion, and yes, Amanda, I can conjure the money you need, and more. The silence in the room was deafening. James stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Victoria finally broke the silence, her voice soft and uncertain. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her, my gaze steady. Would it have made a difference? Would it have changed how you treated me? Would it have made me more worthy in your eyes? No one answered, but their silence spoke volumes. That was the moment the power dynamic shifted. For the first time, they weren't looking down on me. They were looking to me. But I wasn't about to make it easy for them. I can save your company, I said, my tone firm, but there will be conditions. Richard's business instincts flared to life. Name them, he said, leaning forward. I smiled, not out of spite, but out of triumph. This wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. First, I said, there will be a complete overhaul of your leadership team. Second, Food Tech Solutions systems will be implemented across all of your operations. And third, there will be a public acknowledgement of our partnership, and of the fact that the woman you dismissed as a street food cook saved your billion-dollar empire. The room fell silent again. Amanda looked furious, but she didn't dare speak. Victoria looked stunned. And James? He just looked lost. That was the turning point, not just for their company, but for me. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. I had spent years being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. But now, the very people who mocked me were relying on me to save them. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel? As the Beth family stared at me in stunned silence, I knew this was my moment. For years, I had stayed quiet, choosing to let my work speak for itself. But now, they were finally listening, not because they respected me, but because they had no choice. And I wasn't going to let this moment slip away. Richard, the patriarch of the family, was the first to recover. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Let's talk specifics, he said, his tone calm but laced with urgency. What exactly are you proposing? I took a deep breath and laid it all out. First, I began, there will be a complete leadership overhaul. The current team has failed to adapt, and their complacency is a big part of why you're in this situation. Food Tech Solutions will appoint a new team to manage your operations. Amanda bristled at my words. You can't be serious, she snapped. I've been running operations for years. And look where it's gotten you, I said, cutting her off. My tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm. Your outdated methods and resistance to innovation are bleeding this company dry. If you want my help, you'll need to step aside. Amanda's face turned red with anger, but before she could respond, Richard raised a hand to silence her. He didn't argue. He knew I was right. Second, I continued, you will implement Food Tech Solutions systems across all of your properties. Our technology is designed to streamline operations, optimize inventory management, and enhance customer experience. If you'd adopted systems like mine years ago, you wouldn't be in this mess. Victoria, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. And the third condition? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I looked her straight in the eye. A public acknowledgement of our partnership, and of the fact that the woman you dismissed as a street food cook saved your billion-dollar empire. The room fell silent again. Victoria's face paled, and Amanda looked like she was about to explode. Richard stared at me, his expression unreadable. Those are my terms, I said. Take them or leave them. For a moment, I thought they might refuse. The pride that had fueled their empire for so long was the very thing that had brought them to their knees. Could they set it aside to save everything they'd built? Richard finally broke the silence. We'll need to discuss this as a family, he said, his voice measured. Of course, I replied. Take all the time you need. But keep in mind that your stock is already in free fall. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to recover. I stood up, ready to leave them to their deliberations. But as I turned to go, James spoke up for the first time. Marissa, wait, he said, his voice pleading. I paused, looking at him. I need to talk to you, he continued. Privately. Reluctantly, I followed him into the next room. As soon as the door closed, he turned to me, his expression a mix of desperation and guilt. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? He asked. Would it have changed anything? I shot back. Would you have stood up to your family sooner? Would you have defended me when they mocked everything I've worked for? He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I was just trying to keep the peace, he mumbled. I shook my head, anger and disappointment welling up inside me. No, James. You were trying to take the easy way out. Every time your family insulted me, my heritage, my work, you chose silence. That silence said everything I needed to know. Marissa, please, he said, stepping closer. I love you. Isn't that enough? Love without respect isn't love, James, I replied, my voice steady. It's convenience. And I deserve better than that. The look on his face was heartbreaking, but I didn't waver. For years, I had compromised, trying to fit into a world that had no place for me. But not anymore. I turned and walked back into the dining room, where the rest of the Beth family was waiting. Have you made your decision? I asked, my voice calm but resolute. Richard stood, his shoulders heavy with the weight of defeat. We accept your terms, he said. Amanda looked like she was about to protest, but one sharp look from her father silenced her. Victoria simply nodded, her usual air of superiority replaced by quiet resignation. Good, I said. We'll start immediately. My team will be in touch to coordinate the transition. As the paperwork was drawn up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph, not because I had won, but because I had proven something important. The very people who had dismissed me, who had mocked my dreams, were now depending on me to save them. When the documents were finally signed, Richard extended his hand. Thank you, Marissa, he said, his tone genuine. I shook his hand, but my mind was already elsewhere. This wasn't the end of my journey, it was just the beginning. The weeks following the agreement were a whirlwind of activity. Food Tech Solutions moved in swiftly, taking the reins of the Beth family's faltering empire. My team didn't just implement the technology, we completely restructured their operations. The chaos that had plagued their supply chain. Gone. The outdated manual processes that were bleeding money, replaced with automated, AI-driven systems that optimize everything from inventory to staffing. It wasn't just about plugging holes in a sinking ship, it was about giving the company a new direction. Within months, the transformation was evident. Costs dropped dramatically, customer satisfaction soared, and for the first time in years, their financial reports were something to celebrate. Their stock rebounded, climbing higher than it had been in years. I watched from the sidelines as the press spun the narrative. Headlines praised the Beth family for their bold decision to embrace innovation, but those who dug deeper knew the truth. It wasn't their boldness that saved them, it was their desperation. And it was my systems, my vision, that had turned their fortunes around. Despite the media frenzy, I kept my focus on the work. For me, this wasn't about fame or validation. It was about proving, to them, to myself, to anyone who had ever doubted me, that I was more than capable. But amidst the professional triumph, there were moments of personal reckoning. One evening, after a long day of meetings and calls, I found myself standing in my sleek new office, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. It was a far cry from the small, cluttered kitchen where I had first dreamed of creating something bigger. And yet, I realized, the journey wasn't just about where I had arrived, it was about what I had learned along the way. I thought back to the countless times I had second-guessed myself, wondering if I was enough, if my dreams were valid. I thought about the people who had doubted me, mocked me, tried to put me in a box. And then I thought about the quiet strength it took to keep going, to believe in myself when it felt like no one else did. Through it all, I learned that success isn't just about the accolades or the wealth, it's about staying true to your values. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. And then there was James. In the weeks following our confrontation, he tried to reach out. There were flowers, letters, even late-night calls I didn't answer. He came to my office once, unannounced, asking for a chance to explain. But by then, I had already made my decision. I met him in the same conference room where his family had once dismissed me. He looked nervous, as though he knew what was coming but still hoped for a different outcome. "Marissa, I've made mistakes," he began. "I know I didn't stand up for you the way I should have, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I looked at him, feeling a pang of sadness for what could have been. "James," I said softly, "I needed you to stand by me when it mattered most. Not because of what I could do or what I had, but because of who I am. And you didn't. But I understand now," he said, his voice breaking. "I see you for who you are, your strength, your brilliance. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner." I shook my head, a bittersweet smile on my lips. "You see it now because everyone else does. But I needed you to see it when no one else did. That's what love is, James. And if you couldn't give me that then, I don't see how it's possible now." He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret, but he didn't argue. He knew I was right. And as I walked away, I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. In the months that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Food tech solutions continued to thrive, expanding into new markets and helping countless small businesses like mine. But even as my professional life reached new heights, I never forgot where I came from. One Friday evening, I found myself back in my family's restaurant. The air was warm, filled with the familiar scent of frying chicken and simmering collard greens. Customers laughed and chatted at the tables, and a line stretched out the door. As I stood behind the counter, rolling dough for biscuits just like my grandmother used to, a little girl peeked into the kitchen. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you really the lady who owns all those big restaurants now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, kneeling down to her level and handing her a freshly baked biscuit. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm just the lady who makes really good food." She giggled and ran back to her family, and I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The noise, the smells, the sense of community, it was everything I had ever wanted. Success had brought me wealth, recognition, and influence, but none of that mattered as much as this place, this feeling. The restaurant wasn't just a business. It was my roots, my heart, the foundation of everything I had built. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how far I went or how much I achieved, I would always come back to this kitchen. Because this was where I belonged. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? As I reflect on this journey, it becomes clear that this story isn't just about overcoming adversity or proving someone wrong. It's about standing firm in your values, even when the world tries to shake you. It's about believing in yourself when others doubt you, staying true to your roots, and letting your authenticity guide you in a world that often values status over substance. For me, it wasn't about revenge or even recognition. It was about resilience. It was about taking the lessons I learned in that small family restaurant, the warmth of community, the importance of hard work, and the power of love, and carrying them into a space that didn't think I belonged. It was about turning every dismissal, every insult, every condescending smile into fuel to build something extraordinary. And in the end, that's what I want this story to be for you, a reminder that success isn't defined by the approval of others or the size of your bank account. True success is about integrity. It's about knowing your worth, holding on to your values, and never letting anyone make you feel less than. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone doubted you, dismissed your dreams, or told you that you couldn't succeed? What did you do? How did you prove them wrong, or maybe even prove something to yourself? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you found your own version of success. And if this story resonated with you, if it inspired you to stand a little taller, to keep going even when the odds feel stacked against you, then I hope you'll join this community by subscribing to the channel. There are so many stories out there just like this one, stories of resilience, redemption, and the quiet, powerful strength of people who refuse to give up. So, hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that remind us all of what we're capable of when we stay true to who we are. Remember, your journey is your own, and no one can define it but you. Keep going, keep dreaming, and never, ever let anyone tell you that you can't achieve greatness. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary triumphs come from the most unexpected places. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.